welcome to the Road Charge Technical... Let's start that over again. Welcome to the Road Charge Technical Advisory Committee meeting of Friday, June 24th, 2016. We're here in Sacramento, and we'll start off asking Ann Johnson to call the roll.
Here.
Senator Jim Bell, Lee Tin, Lisa Bartlett. Here. Lauren Kay.
Here.
Martin Wax.
Here.
Rita Culbrecht. Here. Pam O'Connor. Richard Marcantonio.
Here.
Robert Poitras.
Here.
Here. Chair Jim Medapper.
Here.
Well, thank you very much. Looks like we have a quorum. I know Pam is here. She's probably on her way over. Let's start off first by, let me turn it over to Susan, if you would like to introduce our newest member of the Technical Advisory Committee.
Thank you, Chair Medapper. Is this on?
Yep.
Okay, great. Committee members, I'd like to introduce you to Christina Asori. She's the newly appointed Chief Deputy Director for the Commission, and so we're grateful to have her here with us today. And just to let you know that she will be filling in for me in a little bit as part of this meeting, so thank you.
And to announce our latest member, let's ask Nidhi to please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you. She takes Ishwar Pitapani's place on the commission, who resigned a few months ago, and welcome.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Nidhi Kalra. I'm a senior information scientist at the RAND Corporation and director for RAND's Center for Decision Making Under Uncertainty. And it is an absolute pleasure to be here, an honor to serve on this committee. I look forward to many interesting and exciting meetings. Thank you.
And again, thank you very much for lending your expertise to our group. We had a chance to have coffee earlier today, and I have an idea she's going to keep us all on our toes. As always with these meetings, questions and comments from the public are always welcome throughout the meeting. If there's something you want to weigh in on, just raise your hand. We'll call on you and ask you to come up. There's a couple of formal spots on the agenda, the next item and item 12, but your input is always welcome. There's blue speaker cards. Ann can hold that up. We want you to fill that out so we know who you are. And again, as we do in all of these meetings, if there's things that come up today that aren't necessarily on the agenda, or if we don't have time, we'll put them in our action list for the next meeting. Let us also welcome Lee Tien, who is joining us. Welcome. Good to see you. This is kind of nice for us. It's like a homecoming with the Technical Advisory Committee. We spent all of 2015 together, traveling around the state once a month, someplace or another. And this is our second meeting in 2016, part of our quarterly meetings. We'll be, again, where are we in September? Yeah, in September in San Diego. So that'll be fun as well. So let's start with public comment. We always start off our meeting. Do we have any non-agenda public comment, Ann? Any slips turned in? Well, seeing none then, let's look at the approval of the minutes for both December 11th and March 24th. They're in front of you. This is an action item.
I'll move approval.
We have a motion from Finnegan and a second from Bartlett for approving the minutes of December 11th and March 24th. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All right, those are approved. Item 4 on the agenda are the TAC member reports, and this would be times where members of the Technical Advisory Committee, things that you've been involved with since we last met in March, or any of the issues that you might want to report on that are out and about in the world as we are beginning this pilot. Anybody wish to comment? Oh, surely you've been involved with things.
I'll add.
Know
a-
you guys. I read of you.
I'll add a small item. One, I was pleased to get the email to enroll, and I did enroll. Had a few minor technical glitches in doing so, but it got worked out, and I did enroll. And I followed up with our claims division, who has signed up as a commercial volunteer with a small fleet of vehicles. And they hadn't gotten their email yet, so I'm not sure if there's some staged emails going out.
I just got mine this morning.
Okay,
So,
okay, great.
it's happening.
We'll follow up to make sure that they go through that process as well. And I heard from a few friends who I had sort of recruited over time that they've been getting their emails and going through the process as well. So it's exciting to see that, and I know we'll be hearing more about that today.
Excellent. Well, I will just report that I've been out and about as I get grabbed from one thing or another. Just yesterday, in fact, spoke to the National Conference of State Legislators. They were very interested in what's going on with the Western States program, which I don't know if we have a spot on the agenda for that, Norma, but it would be great at some point. Well, I guess we could cover that under number 9 on the FAST Act stuff, so you could kind of share with us what you're doing in your role as chair of the Western States Consortium. But a lot of folks are still very interested in what we're doing. We've certainly, I know Mitch Weiss, who's going to speak next on the work group item, has done a lot of traveling around in some of the rural areas as we were really trying to do everything we could to raise those numbers. In the end, I think that we did pretty darn good, and we'll hear more about it as we get into this recruitment update. So that being said, let's go ahead and move on to the working group update, item 5 on the agenda. And I know Ann's not here, so Mitch Weiss will give that report.
The work group met via teleconference on June 10th, and there were a couple of main points. The first was that the work groups reported that they had reached out to rural California in an effort to increase the volunteer participation. A number of the work groups noted that the feedback they got from the rural drivers was that they were very skeptical of the program. And secondly, the work group members expressed an interest in learning about what the potential organizational structure would be of a road charge system in California if it were to move forward on a more permanent basis. Those are the 2 items to report out. Thank you.
Any questions on the working group? And Susan just reminded me, I guess one of the things that I did in May is I got invited by Roads Australia and flew down there. Nice thing is the only cost to the state was my rental car to Los Angeles and back. And they're very interested in Australia and what we're doing here in California. And so spent a lot of time talking with that group. It's an organization that's very unique, one we don't have here, where it's made up of both the state officials and contractors and folks involved in transportation. And I found it fascinating. I wish we did have it here in California because it brings everybody together. It brings together the policymakers and it brings together the people building the projects. A lot of blending of silos, which sometimes doesn't happen here. There's sometimes issues of ethics and concerns like that. But they're very interested in also figuring out a way to replace the gasoline tax, figuring out that it's not a sustainable funding source long-term. And I know, Norma, you were there last year, and I think they're very closely following what we're doing here in the United States.
Do they have different policy concerns, or is it?
A lot of the same thing that you're hearing, that we hear here, you know, in Australia, it's very similar to the United States. It's uncanny, the similarities. And their issues are privacy. Their issues are, you know, really is the money getting used for transportation and, you know, how they're going to get there. And right now it's really politics. They haven't, we're blessed where SB 1077 that the governor signed into law gave us this ability to study this. They're not quite there yet, but they're studying what we're studying. Norma, do you want to add to that?
Well, no, exactly. And I think in Brady's comments, you know, he's tracked where we've received information or inquiries from, and Australia is one of them. And Malcolm will be at, I think it's ITS World Conference coming up in October, and there's 2 panels to discuss road charge and what's going on in California. So there's a lot of interest from folks outside of California, around the state. I was also at the Mileage-Based User Fee Alliance earlier this week, and we had a lot of conversation about the different pilots that are going on and the applications for the FAST Act. I also had an opportunity to meet with the Federal Highway Administration to bring them up to date on what we're doing in California. They were very impressed with how quickly we moved forward, the role of the Technical Advisory Committee in making the design recommendations, and then being able to move forward with almost 8,000 volunteers, initial volunteers. Obviously, we're starting the enrollment process, and we're hoping that we're going to hit that 5,000. But everybody is watching what we're doing, and they were very impressed with the work that was done by the TAC. Susan, you might want to mention the tri-state.
Right, I was just thinking that.
See, I knew there'd be a lot more to talk about, usually.
The California Transportation Commission met with the Washington State Transportation Commission and the Oregon Transportation Commission actually last week on Friday. And there was a panel that on road charge, Norma provided a presentation of the work that you all have done here in the committee and the efforts underway in California. And then there was an update on, by the Oregon Department of Transportation on what they're doing for the road charge, as well as from the Washington State Transportation Commission. And it was a very well-received presentation, and it just really did highlight, at least from my perspective, the work that you have all done is really, truly being watched, and it's really, California, what happens in this pilot program will be very important in informing what happens in these other states and, nationally, because it is California. So that was my take on it. Norma was the presenter for the work that's being done in California, representing California in that panel. So Norma, I don't know if you have anything else you want to add to that.
I think there were certainly a lot of similarities between the different pilots and kind of building, what Oregon has done, lessons learned from that we built into our pilot, and some of the same issues. But I think the one thing that's kind of interesting, Oregon has a pilot that is actually collecting revenue. And they are challenged in trying to recruit sufficient volunteers. They have done a great job of actually testing the collection of revenue, which our pilot is not doing. But getting the word out, I think we had a lot of help from the TAC. We had a lot of help from AAA with getting information out to the members in Southern California. And then our partner with Department of Motor Vehicles and being able to get little flyers. If any of you had registration tags that came between the end of February and March, we send out a little flyer that kind of looks like that, but very simple terms. And that, along with a little silent video that we did at the offices, DMV offices, really helped with our recruitment effort. And if you look at where the volunteers come from, there are across the state. Maybe we didn't hit all the targets that we were looking for, but we have little dots all over the state. So I'm really pleased with the work that was done on that.
Norma, I have a question for you. What do you attribute, or what are you hearing why Oregon's having a hard time? Because I thought in some of their prior pilots, they were able to get all the people they needed. And now that they've gone to a sort of a real charge one, what do they attribute the hard time of getting volunteers for?
There were a couple of things. One, their initial pilots were very small.
Okay.
And so they were hand-picked volunteers, legislators, and some decision makers. This is a pilot up to 5,000. I don't think they really expect to get to that 5,000, but it is an issue of they're actually paying. And they set the rate at 1.5, and they also lost a lot of volunteers. They did an initial call for volunteers. They had folks out there. I think there were some changes maybe between staffing, and we learned from that because we had people signing up as early as December, January, and then we weren't going live until July. So one of the things that we were looking to do was to keep them engaged through the process, and the newsletters that some of you guys received was intended to keep them, interested in getting to the launch date. So I think that was a big thing that we did differently from them.
Yeah, I always like telling people that we've taken what we learned that other states have done, specifically Oregon, things that we liked and things we didn't like. And I think, what we're doing in this pilot, others will learn from to improve on us, and hopefully we'll figure it out as we get closer and closer. And we'll get into that as we move forward here in the agenda today. Any other questions or comments on the work group, since that was the agenda item, or things where we've been? Well, we can move next into really probably one of the more important things on the agenda, and that's the update on the participant recruitment efforts. And so Mitch Weiss and Brady are going to give us an update on that. This is exciting stuff.
Brady will be making the presentation. I just want to note, as Norma went over many of the efforts, and Caltrans really did an impressive job in getting people signing up and volunteering. I would say even to the point where there was one participant who did not have computer access. This person went to a library to get them to print out the forms and mail them in, and Caltrans is working with them to make sure they're enrolled, and really only a sample of one, but unique opportunity to get somebody where we would undoubtedly have more people in the future. Brady?
Thank you, Mitch. Good morning, Chair Madaffer, committee members, and welcome to California's capital city. At the March meeting, I provided you with a brief update on how we did on participant recruitment, and today I'll be following up with that. We've been actively recruiting for over a year now, and today's presentation really is a culmination of this effort.
You look like you're going to cry. You're emotional about it.
Hope you guys want to bring me back.
I just have to take a minute because these guys have worked extremely
Yes,
hard.
they
There's
have.
been a lot of issues kind of behind the scenes that they've been able to deal with. And yeah, it's kind of exciting to be here.
Well, absolutely. And so I'll just dive right in. Here's, as a reminder, we started our website on January of this year. And so the information that you see in front of us is a representation of how we did over that really 6-month period. To date, we ended up with 7,863 volunteered vehicles to participate in the pilot program. We're aiming for 5,000 per the TAC recommendation. And so we exceeded that number, but we're still moving into enrollment, and we'll see how well we do with that. The interest list maintains to stay at pretty high numbers, at a little over 600. We still are continuing to accept people that are interested in following the program throughout the life of the project, so that will not go away. And the number of site visits is different from what you see in front of you, because the number that you had originally when it was printed out was only those visits from California, so we increased that to include all the visits actually internationally as well. As of, these numbers represent as of June 1st, 2016, so that was when we decided to stop the actual recruitment of participants, or of volunteers, I should say, and start looking at enrolling these participants in the pilot program. So I like to use visuals in a lot of my presentations. This is just a site map that shows, it's a heat map that shows where a lot of the site visits were coming from California, along with the listing of the top 10 cities that visited the website. The top 10 cities make up approximately 44% of the site visits holistically. And just a couple stats, because I'm a little bit of a data nerd. The bounce rate was about 50% for those entering the site, and so that's a decent rate for those folks visiting the site. The average number of pages that people clicked on was 2, and the average session for each duration was a little over 1.5 minutes.
Can I ask a question, please? Where did most of these visits come from? Do you know? Were they simply web searches? What was the referring page? I don't know if you have that information.
Well, we don't have the referring page, but I can tell you that 54% of the access from the page is from mobile use. while only 46% was desktop, and that was actually flip-flop from March, where we had a higher usage through desktop usage versus mobile. And then in terms of the rate of people actually visiting the site for the first time versus those that were returning users, that was at about 80% were new visits. So I don't know which portal they ended up on the site, primarily because we hosted our own DOT webpage, so they could have came to that DOT page and ended up on our program site. We also had a social media platform, and so they could have ended up from the social media platform on our website as well. And then I think a lot of our constituents, both TAC members and partners in transportation and others, they've put links on their websites to drive traffic to the site. So there were a number of avenues. So at the last meeting, I had let you know that 49 of the states had actually visited the site, the website, and so as of today, I get to say 50 states have actually viewed the website. And so I think that's a testament to how interested our nation is in this concept we call road charge. And then also internationally, I wanted to tell you that we've had over 90 different countries show interest in the website. So there's definitely a lot of interest being generated. The top 5 countries visiting the website were, of course, the United States. We had Russia, Canada, India, and the United Kingdom rounded out sort of the top 5. And in terms of conversion rates on the website, it looks as though the conversion rate was about 10%. So 1 in 10 visitors that visited the site ended up signing up to be a potential volunteer for the road charge. This is always an interesting slide. It's the top 3 vehicles that were enrolled in the pilot program, although there really isn't any surprises. Toyota Prius at the March meeting was the most enrolled vehicle, and that remains the most enrolled vehicle at about 338 total vehicles enrolled or submitted. Honda Accord actually took the second stance, and in fact, at the March meeting, they were the 3rd. So there was a little uptick in individuals offering up Honda Accords to participate in the pilot program, and the last is the Honda Civic. So the top 3 vehicles actually represent about 11% of the entire volunteer pool. Now we switch over to hybrid and electric vehicles, where Toyota still remained at one of the highest enrolled vehicles in the pilot program so far. The Toyota Prius, again, had about 338 volunteers. The Chevrolet Volt ended up in the number 2 position for hybrid electric vehicles, and that was at about 68. And the Nissan Leaf rounded out the top 3 with about 62. So in total, there was about 468 hybrid or electric vehicles submitted into the pilot program, and that represents about 6% of vehicles that were submitted into the program.
How many total electric again? 100%?
Total electric? In terms of total electric, I'd have to pull, but in terms of the top 3, the total was 468, and that included the Prius, Volt, and the Leaf. I can get you a number for total
Just
electric.
curious.
Top 5 vehicle manufacturers. Here's your top 5 in no particular order. Toyota remained at the top at a little over 1,400. Honda had about 900. Ford had about a little over 650. Chevrolet had approximately 400, and Nissan had approximately 350. In total, 116 different vehicle manufacturers were represented in our pool of volunteers. And the top 5 actually represented about 50% of the total pool of volunteers.
You said 116 manufacturers, are those makes or?
I believe those are various makes. I'd have to get back to you on whether it's makes and models. So here comes the matrix information. This is the matrix that you as the TAC had recommended we move forward with. It's a different look today, but on the next slide I'll be showing you the same matrix. I put a little bit more graphics into it, but this is the summary of the total amount that we talked about earlier, the 7,863. There were about 352 commercial vehicles, and that includes both light-duty and heavy-duty commercial vehicles, so our light-duty commercial fleets are included in that number. We had about 7,386 individuals or households submitting vehicles into the pilot. And then the other category is represented by out-of-state vehicles, Native Americans registered on tribal land, and I believe government fleets is the other element to the other category. But I'm going to be walking through each of those elements in the next couple slides. So the matrix is there on the bottom left corner. You can't really read it, but that's because I superimposed all the numbers into graphics. So we'll walk through each of the quadrants, and I think you'll be delighted to see that we met a lot of our targets. In terms of the TAC minimum participation for commercial fleets, this is for light-duty commercial fleets or businesses. Your targets are overlaid on California on the left-hand side, and then the box with the circle, or the green border that's around it, the green really just represents the color of the matrix. We'll see how we did in terms of volunteers. So in Northern California, we actually surpassed the target by 23 vehicles. Your target was 100, and we ended up with 123 business or fleet vehicles submitted into the pilot. In Central California, we hit right at the target, so that's why you'll notice it's in green as well. And then the only area where I think we did not meet the target is in Southern California. It wasn't for lack of effort. There was targeted recruitment that was applied in the South, along with working with some of our local partners and constituents to try to generate that interest. Thank you, Vice Chair Finnegan, for bringing in the AAA. Your number is represented in that 130. Unfortunately, we just did not meet the target in that area for Southern California.
It's his fault. We understand.
So for commercial trucks,
Brady, Susan's got a question.
oh, I'm
I have
sorry.
a quick question. These are the targets, these are these aren't, is this representative of the individuals that are actually now signed up? They're not signed up yet?
No, this is the
Okay.
actual volunteer pool. So
They
at the
just
next
submitted
meeting, I'm
interest.
going to be presenting to you when we get to that 5,000 mark, what is that composition of the 5,000 that are
Okay.
actually participating? But this is just the volunteer participant
Of
recruitment.
interest, okay, thank you.
In the next item, Matthew will be giving a little update on where we are in the enrollment.
Thanks, Mitch. So for,
Thank you for clarifying this. So these aren't really,
they're not,
so these are just, this is just a result of people who've expressed interest. This isn't
that's
this
correct.
isn't the pilot.
This is not the number of people that are enrolled, because open enrollment is actively going on right now.
Oh, so this is just kind of a,
Well, it's the volunteers
Volunteers.
versus the enrolled. I would assume we're hoping for a fairly high proportion of volunteers to become enrolled, is that right?
I would assume the same.
And will there be
absolutely.
follow-up, well, I'm sorry to take it offline here, but will there be follow-ups at a certain point if people aren't responding to their emails?
Absolutely.
A reminder email every week, once a week.
Maybe I won't sign up just to see what happens.
Test that out. Test the outer limits. get a
You
phone-
will get a reminder because I received my enrollment invitation last week and was out of town, and I've received reminders.
Yeah.
I'm going to complete my enrollment today.
Let us welcome Councilmember Pam O'Connor from Santa Monica,
We're going to talk a little about
who's just joined us. Welcome. Nice to see you.
Okay. So for commercial trucking, that was the upper right quadrant. That was sort of in the rose-colored area of the matrix. I want to first off start by thanking Eric Sauer. He was very tremendous in pulling together the California Trucking Association and his constituency and in bringing in the volunteer commercial truck, not only the categories, but the different trucks that were submitted and companies that submitted trucks into the pilot program. So we wanted to thank him for all of his grassroots efforts in terms of recruitment at conferences and events. And then we had an excellent webinar that was put on by the California Trucking Association and E-Road in tandem, where anyone that was sort of interested from the commercial trucking industry could come and ask questions about the pilot and potentially participate. So thank you for that. The interest actually greatly exceeded the 50 truck target. I think at one point we ended up with somewhere in the area of 900 different vehicles, heavy commercial vehicles that were sort of interested in the pilot. Now, all of them didn't pan out, and what you see in front of you is what we ended up with in terms of the target. However, I do have an update, and this is something you won't see on your slides, is that the 49 number is no longer correct. We've actually met the target. We ended up with 52 in total, and we actually picked up that last commercial trucking category for energy. So I feel like we've met all of our targets for commercial trucking, and it was a job well done.
So is the 52 those that have actually signed up, or again, people who've volunteered to sign up?
49 have actually signed up. There's 3 that are still lingering.
Okay.
We're still in sort of like the open enrollment type period, so. I fully intend on having the full breakdown for the TAC in September.
I wonder if it would be helpful in terms of understanding the distinction between volunteers, if, there was a term for people who are actually in the pilot. I mean, is it reasonable to just call them participants, volunteers versus participants, or is that fair?
Fair enough.
Okay, just-
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think we
So
used
for
the
today,
word
I'll continue
volunteer
to call
forever
people-
because we weren't paying them.
Volunteers.
But
But volunteers are people who have
Enrollees.
enrollees is what you're getting at. People that have actually moved
Right.
across
From saying, I'm interested to.
actually
I'm
doing it, yeah.
Okay, enrollees.
Well, and I'm sorry, on that point, is there a date at some point in the pilot where no one can enroll anymore?
Well,
Will
right
you have
now-
sort of a cutoff that you're either in at this point or you're not?
I think
or-
we passed that, didn't we?
Well, and there's a.
No, I mean, from the volunteers.
It's sort of
to
an
the
open-ended question, and I mean, I don't want to steal Matthew's thunders too much because he's going to talk more about the enrollment process, but we're doing sort of a wave of enrollment, so it's a phased enrollment, and there's been, waves of individuals that have been invited to enroll, and so depending on how many people take action will be dependent upon when we sort of say, this is the end of enrollment. But until we hit the 5,000, I don't think that we really intend on closing down the enrollment. We want to make sure that we meet the TAC recommended target.
So enrollment could go past January 1st?
It could. So July 1st, you mean, in July 1st is really the first day that data will start being reported.
But we
So
will
that's what
set a
we're
date.
doing.
We have not yet set a target as to when, but, if we haven't reached the 5,000 before the end of the year, I don't know. I mean, we have to turn around and write a report, so we'll set a date. We just haven't done that. I don't envision it going past the calendar year.
I mean, are there
Maybe
thoughts
sooner.
from the committee, is one way or the other? I mean, the goal is to try to hit 5,000. I mean, is there any reason why anybody would think we shouldn't keep trying to get to that number?
Well, I think at our next meeting in September,
We'll have a better-
I'd like to see us at that 5,000, and if not,
Absolutely.
what's being done to get us there, I guess.
Agreed.
Marty?
I was going to mention this later. I think we're sort of jumping ahead to the next agenda item. But the question of continuing to enroll people is related to whether or not we replace people who participate and then withdraw because they've moved to another
That too.
state or
That too.
died or something. So it's a more subtle question. And I think we probably should keep enrollment opportunities open, replace people who withdraw.
But, and if that's the case, and we've closed the volunteer participant phase, that is closed. So now we're working with a closed box of people to become enrolled. And I suppose if what you're saying, and depending on whether the 5,000 is hit or we're blown through or not, the question, I guess, is if we come in September and we're for any reason way low, is there a strategy to open things up again? And hopefully we'll never be there.
It seems to me the answer to Marty's question, though, or what he's posed, is to over-enroll. And so that
Absolutely.
if the minimum is 5,000, you're sort of, you're oversampling
Absolutely, and hopefully that's where we are, and maybe
to
that's.
begin with, because if you can't bring in new volunteers, then you can't really replenish it.
Richard?
Yeah, I mean, 2 points. One is, I think that's right as to categories where we hit the target. Where we're below, I would offer that we should continue to keep that open. At the same time, I'd want the analysis, the reporting, to separate out where the data may be based on only a few months' worth of experience so that we can see, because that's probably going to make a difference in people's experience.
Lisa?
I think you have to over-enroll because there will be attrition through the program. And then if we have people starting in July for data collection, and we continue to take enrollees, say 6 months later, we still have enrollees that are coming on board, do the original participants just get to report longer, or do the later enrollees just report a shorter period of time, or do we extend out the whole program then for everyone, including the late enrollees? How is that going to work?
We will not be able to extend past the end of March because we have to turn around and write a report to the legislature
Okay.
by the summer. So,
Okay.
they're not going to get a full 9-month experience
Got
if they
it.
sign on late.
Okay, good to know. Thanks.
I'm wondering, forgive me if everyone already knows the answer to this, but there's people, of course, who have expressed their interest in volunteering, but then who are not, in fact, converted to enrollees. Will those people be surveyed as to why they didn't enroll? And my same question applies also to the attrition, why people may have withdrawn. That seems like an important group and an important issue to understand.
Great question, yeah. And if they, yeah, I think that they should be. I mean, I don't,
We
Yeah,
will be surveying them.
We have the ability to do trigger-based surveys, so I think we can.
our quality control people are in the audience. They'll make sure that we follow up. And by the way, you're new here, this is free flow, so feel free to
Great, thank you.
try to, that's how we get things done.
Okay.
Ready?
All right, so next up is our others target. I want to report that this was the lower right quadrant of your matrix. It was highlighted in a light blue area. Again, it represented agency vehicles or government fleets, vehicles registered to Native Americans on tribal lands, and out-of-state vehicles. Targeted recruitment was needed in all of these areas. And so the numbers that you see in front of you are where we ended up. For out-of-state, we did some recruitment through our Western Road Usage Charge Consortium partners that do border our states to see if they can help push out some interest. We also work directly through the various DOTs in each of those states. And we also, gave a call out to Orgo to see if anyone in their program would be willing to participate in both their program and our program to help with really looking at that interoperability aspect of the project that you had recommended. For Native Americans, we recruited through both the Caltrans Native American Liaison Branch, our various districts, and through the Native American Advisory Committee. We also worked along with Adam Geisler, who is a current CTC work group member, to see if we can gather interest from those Native Americans with vehicles registered on Native American land. And for the agency vehicles, we actively recruited through not only our local partners, but the website had its own intake form for government fleets. And so there were a couple government fleets that were submitted that way. There was also Caltrans will also be participating as a fleet in the pilot program. So right now we don't know the exact number, but we will absolutely hit the 125 with at a minimum of 37 Caltrans vehicles, but possibly a lot more depending upon the various coverage that we'd like to see across the state. All right, and so now we're to our individual and household targets. This is the area that we talked pretty extensively on during the TAC process, but how do we hit these minimum targets in each of the various geographic locations, northern and central and southern, and then also for urban and rural split. Targeted recruitment was needed definitely for the rural and agricultural areas for Southern California, and in that we ended up, well, let's walk through each of the slides first. The target for urban in Northern California was surpassed quite a bit. Our target was 950, and we ended up with a little over 2,800 actual volunteers in that category. For rural in Northern California, we did meet that category as well. The target was 400. We ended up with a little over 450. For Central California, the target was 350 for urban suburban, and we ended up surpassing that by getting about 590, a little over. But in the rural areas of Central California, we came up just short. The target was 400, and we ended up with about 366 or volunteers, I should say. For Southern California, our target for urban was 2,100, and we surpassed that as well with a little over 3,000 volunteers submitted in urban. And so we met all of the urban categories, but again, we fell short in Southern California, where we submitted a target of 300 for rural representation in the Southern California area, and we only ended up with about 78. But that wasn't due to lack of targeted recruitment. There was actually a lot of recruitment that was done for rural representation. We've reached out to various TAC members. We submitted an article to the Rural County Representatives of California, their magazine called Barbed Wire. We worked with the Rural County Task Force, as well as all of our rural Caltrans districts. We've reached out to them to see if they can reach out to help in both Central and Southern California. I also want to note that Mitch did what I call a speaking tour to various rural areas across the state, and so that as well, I think, helped with some of that interest. But again, we fell short, and I say this with the caveat, only in that 94% of California's population lives in urban areas, which means only 6% live in a rural area. But remember, when we were going through this, the TAC recommended that we wanted to oversample the rural demographic because that constituency voiced concerns over this concept. And so we actually ended up at a split of about 76% urban and 24% rural. So what does that mean? Well, the goal for the pilot, we really oversampled the rural population by nearly 400%. And a directly proportional target would have been about 270 statewide, which we surpassed by nearly 3.5 times. So that being said, we didn't meet the target, but I still think we have an adequate representation of rural volunteers in the pilot. Now,
Why do you come to that conclusion, that we have an adequate representation?
well, in terms of just sheer numbers, we have many more volunteers than what would meet, let's say, the proportional equivalent of California as a whole.
Lauren, do you think that rural and agricultural individuals living in Southern California are sufficiently different from those in Central and Northern that this is a problem? I don't think it's a problem. I think.
No, I don't know.
rural
I just want to have some discussion about it, though, as to.
Okay.
Well, I mean, it looks like they may be, because there was a lot of targeted outreach in rural Southern California and significantly different in expression of interest. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised, and I think we should consider what kind of at least polling or something could supplement the actual pilot to test that hypothesis, because I think there could be very different concerns there.
Yeah, I'm not sure that on reflection, that what rural and agriculture means in Southern California.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it means a lot more in the north.
I mean, it's basically 3/11 of the sample was, or the target was 3/11 of the state. And maybe that's, I don't know, maybe that's right, and I appreciate your perspective on this, but it did fall, substantially short of the target. I mean, it's a quarter of the target.
It's definitely an anomaly when you.
Yeah, and so I don't know if that was a targeting error on our part, or if it was I don't know. I just think it's large enough to give it some thought, and whether it's something that we can rationalize, or whether it's something we need to fix. I don't know the answer, but I think it's worthy of some more thought.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I'm just wondering what next steps would be to try to close the gap between the target and the actual numbers, if there will be next steps.
Or figure out if that was, to Lauren's point, was that even a valid target to begin with?
Let me follow on to that is, I wonder if, or one idea for increasing that number might, has there been work collaboration with the CEC, the California Energy Commission, on recruiting participants? I ask because they have an alternative and renewable fuels and vehicle technology program that might be an avenue for further recruitment, and I don't know if that's been tapped.
That's a good idea.
And I have a question also on this southern rural issue. Did Ann Mayer, I assume she participated to some degree, did she provide any other input? I know in the lead up to our whole effort back in, I think, 2014 or so, I presented out at Riverside County, and a couple of us were out there, and there was a huge amount of concern that the rural parts of Southern California, parts of Riverside, San Bernardino County, Imperial, and others, were not represented on the TAC. And that was part of what led to the work group. So I just want to know about Ann Mayer's thoughts as to the adequacy of this number.
Mitch, do you have?
Well, I didn't specifically ask her whether she was concerned about the adequacy of this number, but as you know, she was the head of the work group, and we had considerable discussions at multiple work group meetings about reaching out and asking the work group members to reach out. So I know Ann did, and I know a number of the other ones did. So the work group members specifically mentioned at our call today that a number of them had reached out and just felt it hadn't been particularly receptive.
Carrie, do you have any recollection from?
So yes, I had been in communications with Ann Mayer as well as Ray Wolf, just to see whether or not, they could help us get participants in or volunteers from the rural areas in Southern California, as well as Annie Nam from SCAG. All of our transportation partners were communicated with, sent out materials, asked them to assist us because we knew that we had this gap. And trust me, this number's gone up considerably from when we started that effort. So there was a response out of it. It's just, how much rural is there really in Southern California? That's the question.
Well, being a Southern Californian resident, I think that upon reflection, and I think Lauren just made me think of it, we probably were off base in our targeting. Who else wanted to say something?
I'm just wondering, is there, since we're after the cost of replacing roads, is the ultimate, I think what we're after here is there any correlation between the target groups and the amount of people that have signed up in the cost of replacing rural roads versus suburban roads per road mile? Is that factored in at all?
I don't think that we did an analysis directly on that, no.
I mean, that's, at some point in time, it would seem that would be an important thing to look at,
Absolutely.
especially from the rural perspective.
We
and
heard
maybe
that.
not.
Yeah, we learned that when we were up in Arcata, in your neighborhood, and there was a lot of concern there.
Good point.
Jim, I was just going to mention that from, an agricultural standpoint, you think about agriculture in Southern California, it's Imperial Valley, basically.
Right.
And that's considerably, it's significant, but it's a much smaller area than the San Joaquin Valley and Central Valley. So I would have to also, I think that lends evidence to probably it was an over sampling of that particular area. It's just so much smaller.
Yeah.
I guess my just initial thought is that we should attempt to up the numbers in Central California, because those, it seems that that's where we obviously have a big rural presence, and and we missed the target there as well. And so if we could oversample for Central California and make up, because overall we're below just the overall statewide goal for rural and agriculture. And so, but I'm more persuaded that it's probably not necessary to beef up the numbers in Southern California, but probably is in Central California.
Other comments from the
My opinion.
TAC?
But once more, to be clear, these are volunteers and not enrollees, right? And so the conversion rate I would hypothesize that the conversion rate for urban and suburban volunteers may be higher than those who live in rural and agricultural areas, which means that the gap between the actual and target for both Central and Southern California may be still greater when we actually talk about enrollees, even compared to the volunteers. So that could be a concern.
Good point. Any other comments? Back to you, Brady.
Okay. Well, I think we have a pretty good statewide representation. You don't have this map on your page there, because this is one that I had recently created, but what I tried to do is I took the state and I overlaid where people were signing up by their zip code. And part of that discussion from earlier, I think, if you remember, the definition that we used for urban versus rural had to do with census tracts, so U.S. Census tracts. And people aren't submitting their census tract to the project team when they sign up. They submit their zip code. So, you know, there also could be how we're classifying urban versus rural could be heavily dependent upon what percentage of that zip code is rural versus urban as well, and whether whether our assumption on whether they're urban versus rural is what bucket that falls in is adequate. But I think this map here kind of shows you that in terms of some of the areas that you see represented, you'll see that the darker green represents a scale of about 1 to 4, and you scale up all the way to the red, which really means an area of about 31 to 51 different individuals submitting for volunteers in that zip code. And so the map in front of you, I just wanted to show you that in terms of just statewide spread and representation of where people are signing up. I mean, we've reached zip codes all the way from far north to far Southern California.
And are those colors total numbers or per population numbers?
That is total numbers of vehicle registrations within that zip code. So you'll see highly concentrated areas around Sacramento and the Bay Area, but really even like your yellow areas range from about 11 to 20 different volunteers in that zip code. And so there's some really good representation, I think, statewide, both in areas or counties that I would consider more rural in nature, and then also those in the urban core.
Brady, sorry, a question going back to the rural issue. Say in San Bernardino County, are census tracts outside of the city of San Bernardino all considered rural, or are some of those places considered urban, suburban?
So most of them are considered urban, suburban.
Most of them are. Oh, I see.
Mm-hmm. If you're touching even a piece of an urban area, a lot of times that zip code is deemed urban in terms of census tract. So that was part of the challenge that we had when we defined urban versus rural, and then how we ended up recruiting, and we're only taking in limited amount of personally identifiable information. So all we asked for really was zip code.
So a lot of the Coachella Valley is going to be considered urban, suburban.
Potentially, yes. All right, so we're going to dive in a little deeper into the sub-targets that the TAC set. For gender, you see the TAC minimum targets in the light blue, and then the number of volunteers you'll see in the dark blue. And so in both male and female targets, we heavily exceeded both of those. For ethnicity, I will point out that there's one area that we were not able to accomplish in terms of the target, but for Asian, Black or African American, White or Caucasian, we clearly were able to make those targets. For Hispanic recruitment, we didn't quite make it, although the numbers is fairly close, and it, again, wasn't for lack of recruitment. We actually built our own dedicated landing page and intake forms that were all translated fully into Spanish on our website. On that website, you could also find a frequently asked questions and a fact sheet about road charge, fully translated into Spanish. We took our PSA, that was a great hit, and we turned it into a Spanish version as well, and ran those across DMV offices statewide. We met with the Latino Caucus to see if there's any way that they can help us reach out to the Latino community. We worked with our couple other business partners like the DMV, and then of course our Caltrans districts to help get the word out that we were under volunteered in the Hispanic category, and we asked for help there. We also supplied Spanish materials to TAC members upon request, and I think part of our executive team also did some Spanish media inquiries as well. So unfortunately, we did not meet that target, but we met every other ethnic category that was presented to us. Now, I will say that of the volunteer pool, 347 people did not disclose their race or ethnicity as well, because you could submit various demographic information about yourself, but none of the categories were required. It was all voluntary. In terms of our age groups, we surpassed each of the categories, as you can see. Just again, another caveat, that another 136 volunteers decided not to provide their age when we were recruiting. For vehicle types, hybrid and EVs, we set marginal targets, and we surpassed those by quite a bit. So Jim, to get back to your earlier question, there were 134 different electric vehicles that were submitted directly into the pilot. And then income was another one of those areas where we did not meet the target for below median. We highly surpassed above median. And so, just a reminder, the income categories were based on the California Department of Housing and Community Development state income limits for 2015. The goal established by the TAC was for 50% of the volunteers to be above the county-specific median, so meaning different counties have different medians, and it's really contingent also upon your household size. But my project team was able to make this very easy for somebody submitting their information online, because we were able to take the state income limits and apply it to our web intake form. And so as a person identified what county that they were in, and then how many people resided in their household, this calculation was done for them automatically, and so they received a drop down for above median, below median, and then also a separate category for the low income. Now, the low income is actually a subset of the below median, because the low income represents extremely low and low income categories. The extremely low category comprises of households with the maximum score of 30% of the Housing and Urban Development median family income. And the very low income typically reflects 50% of the median family income. So this was one of those areas that was highly sensitive to people submitting information. In fact, this was the one that people omitted the most out of each of the demographic categories. And in fact, 707 volunteers did not disclose their income. So again, it was the most sensitive of all the questions.
Is there a way, Brady, to just sort of report back on the zip codes where those 707 people live, and maybe also with regard to ethnicity, because we might be able to just take a quick eyeball at what's the median income in that zip code or in that census tract or something compared to the larger area, and we might get a sense that actually we're hitting some of the lower income communities or not.
I think we can, other than just making sure that it's in aggregate and all the PII or personally identifiable information is removed, I think we could absolutely report back on something like that. Okay. And the last item for categories is region. And so we did split up the state between 3 different regions: Northern, Central, and Southern California. The targets are presented in front of you, and we were able to exceed all of those targets on a strictly regional basis. So where are we at today? Well, we did targeted recruitment in April and May. This consisted of a digital strategy because primarily the time frame in which we had to work with and the immediate need to increase the volunteer awareness. We used existing brands of both the DMV insert and the PSA to create a full-scale branded recruitment campaign. We also developed a Facebook page to leverage and support our targeted Facebook digital ad campaign. That campaign in April, the Facebook target audience were basically just the 3 geographic areas, but basically we targeted people that own vehicles. So it was more broad in nature, but by the end of April, we started realizing that we were underachieving in a couple different areas, and so the team increased ad buys for low-income and rural residents statewide. And then in May, we continued to see a lag in low-income and rural, and so what we decided to do was narrow the focus of rural to Central and Southern California only, because those were the targets that we were underachieving in. And also for low income, we continued to target low income households, but also targeted college student representation to see if there could be some students that would be represented in the pilot as well. That effort started in April 4th and ended in May 31st. So that was completed. The project team began picking participants, at least the selection process, to start narrowing it down on June 1st. The first notifications were actually sent to owners representing 5,000 vehicles. Participants were notified on June 13th. So, and that's still ongoing to present. And participants means that they need to go on and enroll with their account manager. They need to decide on which, not only account manager they want to choose, but the method that they would like to use in the pilot program. And so those two items are pretty much contingent upon each other. Again, that kicked off on June 13th. And right now, we pretty much scratched off all of the things that we need to do in terms of the participant in enrollment to get it started. Now, it's an ongoing process. Again, it's open enrollment. We did it in waves. People are tasked with taking action. You know, I've signed up for my device to test, but that doesn't mean that everyone that has received their initial invitation has been able to do that. And so, you know, there is a grace period that we're giving individuals to sign up. And until we really hit the 5,000 mark in terms of enrollment, I don't think our job is done. So what do we have left? We have the launch of the pilot on July 1st, but that really represents the first date that active data will be reported from the account managers, from the participants to the account managers, and to the account managers to our account management oversight team.
Marty?
What happened with respect to the volunteers who were not chosen to be enrolled? Has there been communication with them as yet?
Absolutely. Yeah, so any of the volunteers that have not been chosen are continuing to remain on our interest list. There's for a couple reasons. One, these individuals offered up their time to come participate in something, a very valuable research project for California. And secondly, if the first 5,000 vehicles that have been identified, if they're for whatever reason just is non-action on any of their parts, we can remove a certain amount of those individuals and replace them with, with the difference of those individuals that haven't received an invitation. And so that's definitely a pool or a sample of volunteer vehicles that if and when we need to continue to enroll more individuals, we will.
And this gets back to the oversampling comment or question that was asked earlier. I mean, wouldn't it make sense to try to do that oversampling now, I guess, especially if there will be some attrition, or probably?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we'll work with the project team to see what we can do.
You mentioned a grace period. How long is that grace period?
Initially, we thought the grace period should be 14 days until to create that action to go sign up, but enrollments are you know, they're not increasing as aggressively as we thought, and so we didn't want to close that window off just yet. And so right now we're being more flexible, I think, with the time frame. I don't think we have a specific time frame yet, but I think when we had initiated our initial thought, there was a concern over how quickly we would get to that 5,000, and so that's why we wanted to set the grace period, but we now, I think, are being a little bit more flexible on that.
So there isn't a fixed grace period at this time?
There's not a fixed per se, but people will be notified once we hit that 5,000 mark. If we had invited and we've hit that mark, we're not going to be able to continue to intake more.
And just to follow up on a couple things, the initial email did indicate that there was a certain period to do it, and so there'll have to be some follow-up communication, and that touches on, just to clarify something Brady said in answer to Professor Wack's question, we haven't transitioned anyone to the interest list yet from the volunteers because we haven't met the 5,000. So as long as they're still active, we're not at the point yet where we've sent anybody so many emails that we're just giving up on them, because we've only been doing this since the 13th. So we're still at that point where we can send reminders, we can keep contacting them and following up with them, but eventually at some point, if they don't express any interest, that's when they're going to have to transition.
And is email the only, or I assume it's a primary way of communicating with volunteers, but is it the only way? Meaning, will you be making phone calls to volunteers?
We're only calling volunteers when they call our helpline and have concerns or complaints. When we're reaching out to them to enroll in the program, it's done by email.
I mention it because for particularly the rural users, lower income users, they may not have a computer in their home. Email may not be something they do 15 times a day. So it might be worth considering if we're concerned about meeting targets.
So when they do when you do volunteer, you're not providing that option. Are not collecting that personal information as far as the cell phone or a phone number to call them. So it would be very difficult for us to reach out to them in that manner.
I would, as I mentioned before, though, there is one participant who has signed up, via paper. They didn't have computer access. They went to a library, got them to print out the enrollment forms, sent it into Caltrans, as Caltrans is working with them to enroll them. So it's possible to do that. Unfortunately, we're not really set up to do that in a large scale.
Yeah, I share your concern, and I think, Mitch, that's sort of the exception that proves the rule. I guess the other part of that for me is it doesn't sound like it's necessarily simple and self-explanatory to figure out, which account manager, how do I make that decision, what form of, monitoring and so forth. So people basically have to call Caltrans to reach out affirmatively to ask for that help, or how does that work?
No, we actually have a account management enrollment page that's supported by us as the project team. So Caltrans and our project team, which is the same website that we see when we go to CaliforniaRoadChargePilot.com, except it has its own sort of hosted portion that anyone who's been invited actually can go on. They can, they see 3 different tiles, which are representative of the 3 different account managers that they can choose. They can look at the various reporting methods that they provide, and there's descriptions on how it works. There's a frequently asked questions on there. And then also from there, you can click on a button that will take you to the account manager's website itself, which has also a swath of information available to the potential participant. So they have to come through our website, which is very well laid out. And even for those individuals that maybe don't really know what they want, there's an area in the top where you can answer a couple questions like, do you want to report your miles automatically, yes or no? And so then that helps narrow the field. So some of those account management tiles go away if somebody says, no, I don't want to report it automatically, I want a manual method. So then that account manager is actually removed, and so then they can focus their choice more now on based on their preference, the method that they would like to move forward with. And then, like I said, each of the account managers has a lot of information on the various options that they provide on their websites. And then as well, we have a call center both for the program, so California Road Charge Pilot, and then each of the account managers have their own call center that you can call into. Also, each of their websites has their own web submit form, as well as our own. So there's multiple ways to ask questions, to see if there's a way that you can get the information that you're looking for. And frankly, I've had a potential participant call my direct line and ask me some questions about what to do. And I'm the project manager, so I took the call and I walked this person through the various questions that they had, and and they were pleasantly surprised that I was willing to take my time to do that. So I think
And that's all in Spanish as well, on that form.
the form itself, I believe.
We translated it.
It has a translation button that can translate the website into various languages, actually.
I mean, I think we should anticipate that the very groups where we're not hitting our targets are going to include the most people who are going to struggle to get over that barrier.
Absolutely.
Is there an opportunity to say, when you're in that hosted site, please give me a call, because I don't know, I need help on this?
Yeah, absolutely. There's an area that I think Marty Wax suggested it at one of the meetings last year, where there's an area where it just is kind of like pick for me, or you kind of help me, and so you click on that and you actually submit a form, which does have information like, how to contact you.
Yeah.
And so somebody from the project team contacts you directly and assists you in what you need.
At the time of registration, I mean, you're still trying to recruit volunteers from certain demographics. Is there an option to include a phone number, or is there a policy reason why that's not part of the volunteer registration?
I think, again.
Well, first of all,
It may be too late.
no. Well, at this point, the website's not accepting volunteers right now. So but that's, I think one of the things earlier was my sense that the TAC would like that to be open in the area, for areas that were under-recruited, so we can see about that and see about some additional contact information, what the possibility is. I think another option that we should be considering is if we're having trouble transitioning from volunteer to enrollment for some of the target areas, in follow-up emails, might that be an opportunity to say, if you're having trouble, call this number, and more prominently give the help information out at that point, just as an option.
Other questions?
Okay, well, hopefully in September, I'll have a full breakdown of the 5,000 target, and looking forward to seeing everyone again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brady, and great discussion. Let's then kind of move into some of the things we've already touched on a little bit. We'll get Matt up here as Mitch will kick it off to give us an update on the pilot preparation activities to date.
Yes, and since we've already gotten well into this, I'll just turn it right over to Matthew and let him begin.
Well, it's a great pleasure for me to be addressing the TAC now during this period of enrollment after months of lead up and a flurry of activity getting all of the technical stuff working by now. I apologize if my voice sounds a little bit, unfortunately I got a cold last night. I don't know how that happened in this very, very hot weather and hot and dry weather out here in Sacramento. So I do have some updated numbers on enrollment, but I'm going to save that for the end, so your interest will be maintained through the rest of my presentation. The main focus of my presentation are all the technical activities we did to lead up to where we are today. So I'm going to review the account management choices and technology choices that everybody, that the TAC selected and that we procured and now have set up for operation in the pilot. So I should actually start and say we have 4 account managers. 3 of them are what we call commercial account managers, and 1 is the CalSAM, the California State Account Manager, which operates the manual methods on behalf of the state. These are all operated by private companies, including the CalSAM, which is a subcontractor that is providing that service, but it's done as acting as the state of California. So the commercial account managers are a company named Azuga, which is a Silicon Valley firm, a company named IMS, and then for the commercial trucks, we have a company named eRoad. The state account manager is provided by a firm called Arvato. So the mileage reporting method choices, Azuga actually provides the most. It provides the OBD2 plug-in devices that do not have any location hardware. It provides the OBD2 devices that do have location hardware. It provides an option to use your smartphone that does not use any location information, and another option to use your smartphone that does include location information. And finally, it includes the option to use your vehicle telematics when you sign up with Azuga. IMS includes 3 of those options, just the 2 OBD2 options and also the telematics option. And as I mentioned before, E-Road is dedicated to providing the heavy trucks, the heavy commercial truck service. The state account manager includes the 3 manual methods that the TAC approved last year: the time permit, the mileage permit, and the odometer charge. For the mileage permit and the odometer charge, an official odometer reading is required, and that can be done in one of 2 ways. One way is using your smartphone. You can use this smartphone application that we have to just take a picture of your odometer. And the other way is to actually get your odometer read, and this is going to be done at 15 locations statewide. And that's provided by the Smog Check referee system, which is done under the Bureau of Automotive Repair in conjunction with the Foundation for California Community Colleges. So we have 15 locations. Obviously, as the state as big as California, not everyone is going to be necessarily close to one of those 15 locations. However, for those people, they can choose to use one of their smartphone or one of the other methods, or even go to the time permit, in which no official odometer reading is required. So I'm just going to get into all of the testing that was done that led up to the launching of the pilot.
Could I ask a question?
Sure.
Why was it decided just to have 15 locations where volunteers could go check their, I mean, there's DMV offices all over the state.
There are DMV offices all over the state. I think in discussions with DMV, it became a little bit more challenging to implement a special program like this. Doing it through the Smog Check referee system was logistically a little bit simpler. Brady, do you want to add anything to that?
You know, we're working within a defined budget as well. I think it was part of it. So the Smog Check referee location seemed as though that infrastructure can move quickly. So we were also working with budget constraints on this type of project, and the ability to get to contract quickly. We had that ability with this program versus other programs, and so we thought that this was one of those areas where we could show the legislature that we can have a good synergy between 2 interagencies in terms of their agreement, and for us to roll something like this out in DMV statewide, it would have been cost prohibitive.
And the actual function is a driver coming into the office, having an individual from the office go out to the car, record it, and then put it into a system. Is that?
That's exactly what happened.
Okay, that was, the referees were able to do that, DMV not so much.
That's correct.
Okay.
And I should also point out that the mileage permit doesn't even require one to have a smartphone to use. If you just have a camera phone, you get a text message saying, take a picture of your odometer and send it back to us via text message. So the penetration of camera phone flip phones is fairly high, even among rural and urban, rural and low-income folks. So that does give an option that's available statewide for people to submit their.
But to Lauren's point, I mean, this is pilot, but I think that, I mean, it's just me speaking personally, even for the same reasons, Caltrans probably won't be the folks administering this thing when it goes real time, say 5-10 years from now. It'll probably be a DMV. That's when we would take advantage of all the DMV offices and integrate them to be able to do this. But for the purpose of the pilot, what you're saying is you're trying to be frugal and not, I don't know how many DMV offices there are, but there's a lot. And it's probably easier just to do this 15 for now. But I get the point, and I think you guys understand it as well. If we were to go full scale statewide, we would be wanting to make this as easy for the consumer as possible.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Any other questions, comments? Okay, keep going.
So we did several rounds of testing of the hardware and software and systems individually, and then as a complete system, and I'm going to go through all of those levels of testing here briefly. The first type of testing, one that was specifically requested by the TAC, was security testing. So, of course, in the original enabling legislation that created this whole program, data security and privacy was heavily emphasized, so the TAC specifically requested a data security examination of all of the providers of technical systems to this project. This was done through a very comprehensive survey executed by a third-party company. This included questions based on the fairly well-known security standard ISO 27001. I won't get into details on that, but that's a very well-known electronic security standard. All of the firms were asked to respond to 300 questions in areas of security, and all the firms are the 7 vendor firms that I mentioned on the last slide, the 4 account managers, the 3 mileage reporting technology providers, but also the provider of the participant recruitment webpage that actually collects the original data to come in. So all of those were put through these security review, which included not only the survey, but also individual interviews with each vendor and the webpage provider. And the high net result of this is that there were no critical security issues found, nothing that would have compromised any participant data at any time during the pilot. There were some recommendations for security in the case of a potential future road charging program, and those are recommendations that will feed into the final report that will eventually be produced by this project. But there was nothing that was in any way critical for the pilot. And those were things like, having a red, yellow, green classification of security events and other things that some of the smaller firms may not have completely implemented, but it was nothing that was remotely security critical. The first round of testing that we did for each of the vendors was unit testing. And unit testing was basically done to verify the compliance of the devices and the software systems with the technical requirements that were developed. So there was a large technical requirement document that was developed in the months of February and March that combined all of the technical needs specifically requested by the Technical Advisory Committee, and also just the general functionality of road charging. And unit testing was done basically according to certain procedures developed from those general technical requirements, but then customized by each of the vendors to their own systems, because each of the systems has buttons in different places, their websites look different, their devices are different. So the unit testing procedures then were customized for each of the vendors, and they were performed then by each of the vendors on their own equipment and software separately. They were asked to respond to each of the security steps in each of the test procedures in that test procedures document, and provide proof. And the proof was in the form of screenshots, videos. I don't know if we had any audio recordings, but sometimes just camera pictures to verify that their devices are safe and so forth. We went through all of those testing results and verified that they were compliant, that all the companies were compliant with the technical requirements. So this was a successful round of testing, although there were some requirements that required additional data, additional follow-up, but in general, unit testing was very successful. The next round of testing was integration testing, and this is basically to verify that these devices, in fact, are integrated with one another and with the complete system, and that they use the open standards that were developed in the development of the security of the system requirements and the interface control document, those governing documents. Really, there were just 2 main interfaces that were tested during integration testing, and that was the mileage meter to account manager connection. That means the message that will be sent by the company that provides the mileage meter to the company that is hosting the account management, and that's what we've been calling the mileage message, or odometer message in the case of just those devices that only send odometer information. And also then the account manager to the account management oversight interface. The account management oversight is the system that is being run on behalf of the state of California that collects data from all 3 account managers in one central database. That is the sort of the central depository of road charging data that will be collected over the course of the pilot. The account manager to account management oversight interface includes 5 different weekly reports. There's a report on mileage and road charge revenue, a report that gives individual data by the vehicle, not with location data. Location data, as you know, is all aggregated out before it will be sent to the state. So you just get miles in state, chargeable, non-chargeable miles in state, and then out-of-state miles. But so all of that is included in these 5 weekly reports. And there's also things like errors and events, if the device fell out of a vehicle frequently, and other information included in those reports. And that all is sent to the account management oversight. And again, this testing was successful not right away. There were a couple of glitches that needed to be fixed, but in general, all of that integration was done, and the account management oversight is now receiving reports from all of the account managers. And then we come to the end-to-end testing, and this is what you might call a system acceptance test in engineering lingo. This basically means that we operated the whole road charge system for 4 days, Monday to Thursday, exactly like it is now operating with the people who are currently enrolled in the system, in conditions what we may say are similar to a live pilot. People drove home at night and drove back to work or wherever they were going shopping, and then received an invoice and got to close out their accounts. There were 34 participants on, there are 8 different mileage reporting methods and 11 different combinations of mileage reporting method and account manager. So obviously there are some repetition between mileage reporting method and account manager. Again, there were 3 light vehicle account managers, the 3 I presented earlier. Then those included the 34 participants on Azuga IMS and the California State Account Manager. And finally, there were 2 heavy vehicles, in addition to those 34 vehicles, that were operating under E-Road, the Commercial Vehicle Account Manager, during that time. I'll provide a little more detail on the end-to-end testing. On Monday, we had an onboarding session. It was in this room. We got everybody onboarded, or almost everybody onboarded for those 34 people. On Tuesday, the 9 people who had, or 9 vehicles that were equipped with location-based devices drove to Reno. The purpose of this drive to Reno was to kind of validate the accuracy of those GPS devices. Those vehicles were outfitted with Trimble GPS receivers. The Trimble GPS receivers are used in construction. They're sort of a gold standard. They're more accurate than the GPS receivers that are in the plug-in devices, which go under your dashboard, which somewhat impedes the quality of a GPS signal. I'm still in the process of data analysis for this, but I am happy to say that the devices for which we've completed have deviate from the Trimble gold standard by not much more than 1%. So we're measuring those data pretty accurately. We also practiced changing operational concepts. So in other words, people could change from a mileage meter to a smartphone device or whatever, go from the smartphone device to a paper, to the manual methods on the California State Account Manager. We did a little bit of failure conditions testing. This included making sure devices were unplugged from a vehicle, or if you turned off your GPS signal using the GPS-based smartphone option, just to make sure that those were recorded as errors in the system, and the system picked those up. So that was on Wednesday, and then Thursday we had the payment and account closeout session. Friday was not really needed. It was reserved for makeup testing. We did a little bit of kind of looking through the scenarios at that point. And that was a very busy week for me, getting everything up and running. So we discovered some issues during that week, but before I guess I get into those, just the analyses that we're kind of looking to perform, and I'm currently still going through in the reporting, are the basic question: does the system work, and how can we make the participant experience better? That was, I think, one of the biggest set of lessons learned is the different ways that we could make the participant experience more smooth and straightforward with the use of the various account managers and the use of the various mileage reporting methods. To determine this, we looked for both the self-analysis of the account managers, because the account managers were all physically here. We had them come and work with the participants directly, and also the feedback of the participants on a survey. All the participants to that, in that week of end-to-end testing, were given a fairly comprehensive survey that allowed them to express their own opinions about their own experiences. So in addition to sort of does the system work, we looked at the accuracy of the devices, which meant for distance and fuel data where available. I should say the fuel data that we got was based on self-reported filling up of tanks, and Well, people tried to report their fuel very well. I don't think that the data that we got from self-reported fuel consumption is going to be very good to use. That doesn't mean anything about the fuel not being measured well by the devices. It's just that reference data that the participants provided about how many gallons they added to their tank was not close enough to what we actually needed to do that fuel consumption analysis. However, regardless of that, the account managers themselves have done a much more detailed and accurate verification of that their own fuel consumption works accurately. So for device accuracy in terms of distance, we looked in terms of the non-location-based devices, just comparing those non-location-based devices measurements with the vehicle odometer. So we're not looking for any sort of a ground truth, but if you're taking a picture of the odometer, making sure that the distance computed by the smartphone app actually is the same as recorded by the participant when they're writing down their vehicle odometer, and that looks very good, as you would expect. For the location-based devices, we looked at these gold standard GPS results from the Trimble units, and again, those are looking to be deviating around the order of 1%, nothing more than that. Again, I mentioned the failure conditions being performed on the select vehicles, and also this account management oversight entity, the entity that is going to be collecting all the data from all the account managers over the course of the pilot. We had all of the account managers submit their weekly reports to the account management oversight at the end of this, and just verifying that that data was in fact transmitted correctly.
Matthew, the account management oversight,
Yes.
is that within Caltrans, who is that?
Yes, it is being performed by a subcontractor now, but it represents a functionality that would reflect something that would be performed within the state of California.
But it's different from the state account manager?
Yes, it is completely separate from the state account manager.
And in terms of the participant experience, apart from looking for ways to improve it, did it meet a basic standard of user-friendliness?
I mean, there were various ways. A lot of participants did have questions, suggestions of how to improve it. I don't know, Mitch, do you want to comment on that? You were a participant here. And
Yes, and I was complimented by the vendor on my ability to break things. There are a number of little things that came up, like, if you're, I tested one of the smartphone apps, and, it didn't get the picture right for my VIN. It kept turning it the other way. And so, what kind of message do they give to people on how to do that in terms of, holding your phone a certain way? And then little things like the commute timing of the communication and how they push the messages in a way that's, I would get a notification to take a picture, but the notification would go away from the app, so I wouldn't. I glanced at it briefly. I turned on my phone. What did that say? I don't know. So the need for multiple ways to communicate, the importance of not having a lowercase l and a number 1 in an activation code that look exactly the same, because that took 3 or 4 tries to figure that out. So there were a number of very useful things like that we learned that will help improve the pilot and those interfaces in the pilot, but undoubtedly we're going to continue to learn those as we go along.
So I've got some of the results up on the screen now from that testing, and I would just say technically the system I think worked well. We collected mileage data. It appears to be accurate in all cases. There are improvements needed on the human interfaces, and I've just listed 3 general areas there where some improvement was needed. In terms of account sign up, just needs to be streamlined. We needed to improve the activation code, as Mr. said, getting rid of that 1 and L distinction, just clarifying the activation code needs to be typed in correctly and the user's email needs to be typed in correctly. Also, just making it clear how to find the vehicle identification number. That's a bit of a challenge for people. That is a number that does need to be inputted, but people are not so familiar with that. So we remind them now on the main web page that this is a number that's usually visible in the front windshield of your vehicle, or on the post of your car, or on your insurance document, or on records that you might get from your Jiffy Lube or whatever place you get your car serviced, and so forth. We need to remove some of the technical language and acronyms. One of the vendors used the term OEM, which means original equipment manufacturer. It means an automaker. Obviously, not a lot of folks are aware of that. So we wanted to make sure all of the language was simple, plain English, not too technical. those are the things that we kind of identified in account sign-up. In terms of the mileage reporting methods, specifically, sort of in general, there was a number of people that wanted to reduce the numbers of emails and steps to sign up. This was a specific question about the California State Account Manager that was designed with, you had to sign up, get an email, click on that, go back, sign up your vehicle, get an email about that, and then buy a permit and click on that. So we've streamlined that a little bit, reducing the number of emails. Clarifying the vendor roles. This was mostly an issue with the two smartphone methods being provided by Azuga, because you would sign up with Azuga as an account manager, and then you get an email from the vendor, say Driveway, that's providing the GPS-based app, or the vendor VCon that's providing the note location-based app. So we're just trying to simplify those vendor roles, making sure it's, I mean, those things are still branded separately, but it should be very clear to the user why they're receiving these emails. For the telematics service, we added a vehicle compatibility interface, and we're making sure that those people specifically who had telematics vehicles that are compatible with the service we are providing are recruited, and those who do not have vehicles, they may have telematics, but they're not fully supported by the company we're providing, we're clearly notified, so we're clear on that. For the smartphone without location, that was the one that Mitch was describing earlier. We wanted to make sure that people got the reminders correctly to take pictures of their odometer. So these were both the push reminders from in the app itself. You know, it shows up as a little one next to the app in your message, or emails or text messages. So whatever method the user wanted to be reminded by, we could provide it to them. I think text messages were probably the most desirable requested form of, but they can do all three of those if they'd like. Improving the odometer capture and messaging, that was exactly the issue that Mitch raised, just trying to make the app a little bit smoother for taking pictures of the odometer. For the smartphone with location, they had something called an activation code. This was an unfortunate name because the name that we had chosen for the sort of the code that lets you sign up with any of the account managers was called vehicle activation code, and we now found out we also had an activation code for this, so people were typing in very logically that, well, in fact, the one that they had was only numbers, and they had an activation code with numbers and letters, and then, well, how do I type this in? So we've changed it to app code, so that will also be clear. And also making sure that that smartphone with location method gets a initial odometer reading, which was lacking. For the payment, we simplified the payment process in general, just so it's a click of a button. Needed to improve the invoice formatting. Some people were unhappy about the formatting of the invoice. It was just a little bit complicated, so we've taken steps to do that. It may not be quite as simple as an invoice would be in an ideal world, but it does have summary information up top. Each of the vendors' invoicing formats are a little bit different, but I think they have the summary information in a good place. And then adding a fuel tax credit was also a request because people were concerned they were being double taxed. And finally,
can you share those sample invoices around? So we can
when they are finalized, yes, absolutely. Some of those are still being finalized because those aren't going out during the month of June because it's just an early month. But yeah, I mean, maybe within 2 or 3 weeks, I think we'll definitely have those. And just finally, the day of travel issues, one of the account managers inadvertently set their system to work on Greenwich Mean Time and not on Pacific Standard Time. So, I mean, that was something that was in the requirements to use Pacific time, not so changing with the daylight. And anyway, that vendor is now changing to Pacific time. So, I mean, that results in when you drive, some of your miles show up on the wrong day. Anyway, that's also being fixed. Just wanted to give you a quick flavor of that participant webpage, the webpage that helps you choose between the account managers that Brady introduced earlier. This is the webpage that really helps those people to make that decision. Do I want to go with Azuga? Do I want to go with IMS DriveSync is actually their branding, or do I want to go with the California State Account Manager? We can send you the link to this if you'd like to poke around on it yourself.
Can I make an observation? On the CalSAM, it's really teeny tiny, but the icon that represents the permit for 10, 30, or 90 days and the icon for report your odometer reading look like they should be switched.
Oh, okay.
You know what I'm talking about? Like
that may have been an old version of the web page. If there might have been a switching issue there. Okay.
Matthew, I just wanted to say that you don't need to send the link to anybody here because everybody around this table's already signed up and seen it,
I
right?
hope so.
You would hope.
Yeah,
I don't want to do any public shaming right now, but I do remember for a while there, some of you all hadn't signed up. You probably got an email or two from me.
And if I could just toss in an experience I had. So when I first got the email, I was at work. I tried to log in through my cell phone, and it wouldn't let me pick the choice I wanted. So then I tried it on my, so I called. I was told to try it on another device, so I tried it on my work computer, PC. Was able to do everything but I got to the last step and it froze. So I called again and was told to try it on a different computer, like on my Mac at home, which I then waited a few days and on the weekend did so and got through. But I assume that these sort of interface issues, whether it's the browser or the device being used, are being addressed.
Or AAA just has lousy computers and they need to upgrade.
This is my personal phone, but
Thanks a lot for sharing that experience. Yeah, we'll certainly look and see if there's are any remaining interface
I mean, I was
issues.
involved with it, obviously, but I would have been more frustrated if I were just a typical
Sure.
volunteer.
Good.
Well, that's good insight. I mean, you do, and that kind of follows up to an earlier comment, what about everybody that doesn't sign up or they get halfway through, get frustrated, and then there's quite a drop-off?
Yeah, no, that is part of the challenge. I'll get to my enrollment number soon, just one
All
more
right,
slide.
let's let Lauren
sorry.
keep beating you up.
No. On the previous slide, Matthew, you're talking about the payment. I know that's all part of the, how do the participants, how are they informed that they're actually not going to be paying, but there is an invoice? And how is that, I could see a little.
Everywhere we speak about it, we speak of simulated payment. So in fact, that was one of the learnings in end-to-end testing, that we need to emphasize that simulated nature of the payment everywhere. This is simulated. every participant receives a fake credit card number or a fake voucher number or both.
Okay.
In the case of IMS and Azuga, those numbers are pre-populated into the payment page. So you go to the payment page and your fake number just pops up and you click pay.
Okay.
For the CalSAM, you get an email with these are your fake data right at the beginning, and they need to type that in. I mean, we've tried to be very, very clear that you're only using these fake numbers and not actually your real credit card number.
Is there a history of this sort of experiment using these kinds of simulated payment systems? Are you doing this based on prior experience in the consulting land?
I did have the opportunity to work in the Oregon pilot, but that was actually using real money. So I don't recall, honestly, any. We ask our vendors to come up with the easiest way for them to implement a simulated payment system, and they all said, well, just let's make simulated credit card numbers. And the simulated voucher number is supposed to simulate the payment by cash or check or something. So you have this alternative. They're both just numbers that are assigned to people that are just kind of random digits in the format of a credit card or a voucher number.
Okay, thank you.
Just a comment from me. So maybe it's the lawyer in me, but the fake simulated payment structure and then the fake terms and conditions started to seem all too real when I started to read them. So, I gather that it is sort of fake, but if we can just at some point, and I think they've done a good job of correcting that, but really at the top of that pop-up or that interface has to be, this is all simulated and what that means. And nothing's being exchanged, so there's a very clear understanding of that. I mean, I went through it knowing that's a nice credit card. I know it's not mine, but I'm also just clicking through, and as I was clicking through to the terms and conditions, it was not even applicable to the pilot. Given that it controverts the existing law that says we won't be using any information, then here it says we're going to be using all that information. So I know that's been corrected, but I think just to reiterate that.
And that's the beauty of having these discussions now, because you guys providing input along with others. And I know our quality control people are monitoring this closely.
Good. So just one more slide, and then I'll get to the very latest enrollment numbers, which I'm sure you're all waiting for. We set up a central call center for the overall project. Each of the account managers has their own call center that can help you once you have chosen or if you're fixed on choosing that account manager. But the main purpose of this overall volunteer information line is to provide service to people to help them make that choice. Because honestly, asking people to decide between 3 account managers and in fact amongst those 12 different mileage reporting options is quite non-trivial when they've not done something like this before. So we knew we'd have a lot of questions both verbally and via email. So the volunteer information line was set up by a subcontractor called PRR, and we have the actual customer service representatives who are on the phone 24/7 provided by a firm called AnswerNet. There are 12 AnswerNet staff that are trained specifically in the standard operating procedures for this project, and staffing levels range from 4 people at the peak time of day to in the wee hours of the morning, just 1 person available. To be fair, the use of the call center, I think during the first week they averaged about 3 calls per day per 24-hour period, and in the last week it's been more like 5 or 6, maybe 8 on some days, but it has not been such that in most cases you wouldn't be sufficiently staffed with 1 to 2 people. So we may be a little overstaffed, but that's fine. We want to make sure when people call that they get an answer immediately. We also have 4 dedicated staff at the firm PRR itself to both do emails, to respond to emails. That's been more heavily utilized, not really surprisingly, by people who need help. And by far the most common issue that they call the helpline with is help me make a choice, help me decide between these many different account managers and these many different methods. So that was really what we expected, and that has proven to be true.
Have you monitored the responses from the helpers to make sure that they are well-informed and are truly helping people?
Yeah, I mean, we absolutely have a daily dashboard that we get from the call center itself that talks about their resolution. We've seen example emails that they've sent back. They're all working on a script that we wrote and Caltrans reviewed and in great detail. So they're not, authorized to kind of go off script. They're just providing this information, and as far as I can tell, they are indeed being very helpful to the participants.
And are participants being asked why they made the choice they made up front?
There will be surveys. They have not yet been asked, but during the participant surveys, they absolutely will be asked questions like that.
So, and along that line of question, and I get asked this as I talk to reporters frequently, they're always asking me, can we talk to a volunteer? So in the survey process, are we going to be asking, would they be willing to talk to media or anybody if they wanted to ask questions?
That's interesting. That's not a suggestion that I had heard before, but it's certainly something we can look at.
Yeah, we certainly can reach out to our participants and see, and, the whole thing is that personally identifiable information, we need to be very cautious as how we make that approach.
Yeah, again, it's just one of those things where how else would we do it unless it's an insider? A lot of times the media, they don't want to talk to an insider. They want to talk to just Joe Blow. So it might not be a bad idea to figure out a way to caveat the question. Sometimes the media is interested in seeing how this is going. Would you ever be interested in talking via social media or take a phone call? So that way, if they wanted to get added to a list,
sure,
they could then be a pool that they've given permission to have their contact information released.
No, I think that sounds like a great idea.
Or for one more level of privacy, it may be that that's a list that then, when there's a media inquiry, that's a list that gets emailed and people can subsequently choose to volunteer, so that their personal information is never, there's no list provided to the media ever. It's that someone approves a contact.
Because that's a thing, I mean, once the pilot kicks off here in a few days, we're going to get a lot of interest. Well, how's it going? How's it working? What do you think of it? What do you like? What don't you like? And besides those of us on this technical advisory committee, and I would personally ask each of you that are participating to make sure you let Carrie or Mitch know that you give permission to give your feedback. It's going to be important, and you guys probably are the first line, as well as some Caltrans employees and these guys, because the public, especially the legislature, is going to want to know, what do you think of this thing? Do you like it? Does it suck? What do you think?
I just want us to be sure that this isn't going to sort of contaminate the pilot in any way. It's almost like complaints that you hear sometimes around an election when early results happen before somebody votes.
Right.
So to the extent that that could start to
I
change
agree with you.
people's
It's the same
experience.
reason you don't ever release the preliminary poll results while you're still in the middle of doing a poll.
Yeah.
Wait till
Yeah,
you're done
exactly.
with the entire sample. I get that.
Yeah,
But
maybe the
I'm-
reporters should just sign up
Yeah.
if they want to be able to get some firsthand.
I've suggested that. Harry?
So just, when you got your newsletters, you noticed that there was a volunteer spotlight. Those are people who have actually sent me emails and said, I want to be on the volunteer spotlight, I want to tell you my story. So we're going to continue that effort. Once we have our participants on board, we will be sending out monthly newsletters, letting them know about how the pilot's going and giving them helpful tips and hints on their navigating through the pilot program. But also, we will include in there, are you interested? The TAC is going to be meeting in San Diego in September. You're more than welcome to come and provide some testimony on, how is it going? This is an opportunity for us to gather that input from them without really reaching out directly to individual members, but as a group as a whole, letting them know there are opportunities for you to speak your mind and give us some feedback on how the pilot is going.
Good point.
Okay, now I will move
Drum
on
roll.
to the.
All right, here we go.
Are we ready? Move on to the actual sign-up data. The first two slides I will provide are sign-up data through yesterday, and then the last one is sign-up data through 9 a.m. this morning. So as of yesterday, we had 1,251 vehicles actually signed up for the program out of 3,440 invitations issued. Of those 12,051, yes?
Clarification, vehicles? Because
Those are
I signed
vehicles.
up 2 vehicles.
Yes,
So is
so-
that counted as 2?
Yes.
Okay.
1251 is the number of vehicles signed up right now. Of those vehicles, 725 of them are on the Azuga account manager, 279 of them on the IMS account manager, and 247 of them are on the state account manager. And I'm afraid I don't have any of these breakdowns by the demographic, geographic data that are presented earlier. That'll all be presented in September, hopefully, after we hit 5,000 vehicles. But yeah, obviously, the Azuga account manager does offer the most options, is taking on the most participants, and it's fairly evenly split between the other two.
Following up on Marty's question, so the
Microphone.
5,000.
Mike.
So the 5,000 target is vehicles or people?
It's vehicles that.
Okay, so, and yet, but the 7,000 or so volunteers were people.
Those were, correct. So there were about 10,000 vehicles among those 7,000 volunteers. Yeah.
Okay, wait a minute.
Exactly.
No, I mean, I'm just thinking about, going back to the prior discussion, if the 5,000 is vehicles, then, for instance, when you're looking at income,
Yeah.
then higher income households own more cars. So it would be useful to translate all of this into households or individuals.
Oh, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And that's something that's going to be done for the next TAC meeting, no matter what. Yeah. So now the actual, and perhaps even more interesting numbers, the participant signups through yesterday, broken down by the method chosen. So about half of the people are choosing one of the devices, plug-in devices that uses GPS. I personally am not really surprised by that because that's the one device that gives you a lot of extra features that you don't have just driving a car. I mean, these devices have, each of them, they come with an app that you can use to monitor your, they have geofencing, they can trip a signal if you drive over a certain boundary. You can set it up to do a whole lot of different things. They're nice interfaces and provides a different level of service for the participants who have these devices. Second, after the number, the plug-in devices that use GPS is people using the smartphone with GPS option. Again, I think people are very comfortable with smartphones, and so I think it's worth observing that between those two, again, this is only a quarter of the vehicles expected, but 60% of those are using some sort of a location-based device, a device with GPS. After that, it's fairly, you have 90 vehicles on the plug-in devices that don't have GPS. another 88 vehicles on the smartphone application that does not use GPS. 32 telematics vehicles so far. The 95 number is actually the non-specific CalSAM number. Those are people who have registered a vehicle with the CalSAM but not yet purchased a time permit, a mileage permit, or an odometer charge. Those people will be getting reminder emails that they do need to go and purchase one of the permits that goes on their vehicle. The lowest number by far is the time permit. Only 12 people have actually purchased time permits so far. 35 people who have purchased mileage permits, and 105 people who have purchased the odometer reading, odometer charge.
And when you choose odometer read, do you find out which of those 15 locations is how far away from you?
When you choose odometer reading, you have to select either between the smartphone option of odometer reading, which you have the app, or the location or the manual reading method with the Smart Check. There's a map on the website that shows pinpoints into the state of California where all 15 of those locations are. So if you choose, you go to that map and choose which one. And then finally, the update as of 9 a.m. today. I don't have any pretty graphics for this, but as of 9 a.m. today, there were about 4,000 individual invitations sent, which included a little over 5,000 vehicles so far that have been invited. Of those, in terms of overall enrollment, we have now over 100 more than yesterday, 1,365 vehicles enrolled, which is a net a 27% conversion rate. But just as time goes on, the conversion rates go up. So for the very first batch of invitees, which were Monday of last week, those are now up to 46% conversion. And I should point out that that was actually a batch of, so we're doing sort of a gradual rollout of invitations. I haven't explicitly addressed that, but that batch that went out on Monday was actually low income and rural, and they're actually the highest responding so far. That's one data point. That doesn't prove anything. I'm fully aware of that, but it is an interesting observation. They've also had the longest. I mean, the fact that they've had a full 10 days to sign up, I mean, that just means that our conversion rate is going up in general. If we can hit 46 to 50% on all the batches, I mean, I would strongly hope that we hit 5,000 vehicles during the month of July. That's very much what I think we're on
You
track.
mean that if you're a rural that signed up and they haven't been notified that we're not going to be notified?
Nobody has yet been notified that we're not going to be notifying. That's not, yeah. And that's all I have.
Wow, what a great presentation, and it's really good to see how fast that number is growing. I know myself, I just got my invitation just earlier today. I suspect because it was an electric car, they were trying to figure out how to make that work before I got it. But and I too, Marty, 2 vehicles, so once I get signed up, it'll be good to see how it works. I'm looking forward to participating. Well, the timing is perfect for us to break for lunch. Oh, Marty?
Question?
Please.
I was mystified by one of the rules. It said that if I was instructed that if my vehicle it goes into repair for more than 5 days, I have to notify the program. But it didn't say, for example, that if I go on a Caribbean cruise for 3 weeks, I have to notify the program. What's the purpose of the notification?
I assume you chose one of the devices
Yes,
that plugs in.
yeah.
So the device sends a message every time. Once it's unplugged from a vehicle and replugged into a vehicle, it sends a message. After 5 days, the company is going to be wondering why it hasn't heard from your vehicle. Why they do it differently between repair and a Caribbean cruise, I'm honestly not sure.
Well, the Caribbean cruise, you're probably not unplugging the device, but
Yeah,
if
so
it's
the
in for
device is
repair,
built
you
in.
are unplugging the
I get it.
device because
Yeah,
that's the whole
that's
point
right.
of the port.
Thank you. That clarifies. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments?
Is that right?
Okay, there is a list in front of me here of a number of places for lunch. Lebu, which is just across the street behind us, going out this way. There's Vallejo's, great taco place. If you want to see a list, come on up here. There's also a cafeteria here in this building on the first floor that serves gourmet meals. So Oh, I'm sorry, did I say something? So you are all welcome to enjoy a good lunch. Why don't we reconvene right at exactly 1 o'clock, so 1 hour from